Cool. Yeah, just want to check. OK, great. So hi, for those who don't know me, my name is Patrick. I'm on the growth team out of San Francisco. And I'm here to talk to you a bit today about designing for growth. We will explore how to think about growth and why it's different from a product mindset. But before we begin, have everyone stand up. OK, you're going to take your right hand, you're going to put it on your head. You're going to take your left hand, you're going to put it on your stomach. You're going to tap, and you're going to go around. See if you can do this. Just a couple more minutes. Here we go. OK, perfect. Now everyone can sit down. Now, I feel a lot better. I want to just take a quick poll real quick. Stand up if you resonate as someone working within growth, or if you think you're a growth designer. Stand up. OK. So we get about 12 people. OK, now sit back down. Now, if you think you're in product, stand up. Now, is there anyone not standing? A couple people. OK, well, we'll get to you later. All right, sit back down. Now, how many people think there's a difference between product and growth? OK, raise your hand. You can do that. OK, so there is a difference. So we have some consensus there. OK, so first, growth is not a substitute for a great product. So we can get that out of the way right now. Like, having a great product is really, really important. It's much easier to grow when you have a great product, as great products lead to strong organic growth. So what is the purpose of a growth team, and why are we investing in one here at Atlassian? So let's take a step back. Our mission within the growth team is to help accelerate Atlassian towards our goal of 100 million MAU. We do this by identifying the key levers that we can move to build upon the strong organic growth of the business. Another way to think about this is that the growth team's role is to get us to the goal faster and provide the business insights that can be used to make better decisions. So we've talked about a bit of that in the last session. OK, so poor distribution, not product, is the #1 cause of failure. So Peter Thiel, I know, a little controversial, but great quote. No matter how great your product is or feature, if no one knows it exists, no one will use it. But still, many people believe if you build it, they will come. We know this is a flawed way of thinking. It doesn't work. So what can we do to help accelerate organic growth of our products? So this is the product death cycle. A lot of the time, teams try to increase organic growth by adding additional features. This is often referred to as a product death cycle. You launch, you grow, growth flattens, you add new features, and this is a very cyclical pattern that you can see a lot of companies adopt. One thing to realize is that the best products don't always have the most features. The more features we add to our products, the more complex we make them, and growth starts to flatten, if not go downhill. So if adding new features is not necessarily the key to increasing growth, what is? So one way to look at this, and Nat mentioned this a bit yesterday, is that product teams and growth teams create value, while growth teams get users to experience the value as quickly as possible. So a better way to increase growth without adding additional features, which contribute to the product death cycle, is increase the value of the features that you already have. So how do we do that? And this goes into actually turning all of our customers into passionate users as well, which Jürgen mentioned yesterday. The growth team does this by working with the product teams to identify the areas of friction and the key actions a user needs to take in the product in order to be successful. We then optimize the experience by either reducing the friction or helping guide users to take the actions that lead to the aha moment. So what is a growth designer? A growth designer is someone who is focused on designing and implementing on a rapid cadence rather than coming up with a pixel-perfect design. They are focused first and foremost on driving measurable impact. Some of their characteristics are they are impact-driven, versatile, scrappy, think with data, are avid learners, and competitive. So how many people actually resonate with those traits? So about half the room resonates with those traits. And the DNA of a growth team, slightly different as well. So they are data savvy, research-driven, highly creative, and they follow the growth process. I know we've had to touch a bit back and forth on process. For us, this is a loosely guided process. It helps us accelerate the impact that we have, and it follows a workflow that we're accustomed to and we know works. As growth designers, we want to identify the biggest opportunities that we have, the biggest impact. So thanks. I stole this slide, by the way, from you, but we'll keep it. For us, this really involves looking at the data and trying to analyze where the biggest MAU gains can be made and devoting our focus and attention there. Once we have identified an opportunity, we then work on building out a strategy for how to address it. So once we know what the opportunity is, we build out a strategy, and that's very similar to what product teams do. But we have to understand the story. We also do research. It's not all quant. We have Mary and DPS on our team who help us connect the qual and quant data into something that's very meaningful and that's easy for us to circulate across the organization. And once we have this story, we then create a storytime artifact. Thanks, Nick. This artifact highlights all the things that we know or don't know and basically shows our areas that we need to conduct further research into. This helps us make better decisions on what to prioritize and where the opportunity is. With the storytime artifact in hand, we then bring together a cross-disciplinary team to come up with hundreds of ideas related to how to address the area of opportunity. So we go really, really broad, and then we narrow it back down. We use a combination of research, insights, and our gut to call the ideas so that only the best make it to the end. So we're not, if you think about a growth team, we're very, very focused on data, and then a lot of the times we probably get a bad rap, and everyone thinks that all of our decisions are made off of data. But a lot of the times we use our gut. There's a lot of data that we don't have access to, and if you've worked at Atlassian for any length of time, you'll know that our instrumentation is not always perfect. So sometimes you have to rely on your gut as well as data. Once we have that list, we spend as little amount of time as possible to clean them up and turn them into experiments. We then prioritize the experiments using ICE to make sure that we are working on the ideas with the highest chance of success and/or impact. So the growth process. We need to think about growth in a systematic and thoughtful way, similar to how we think about building products. We want to transform growth from an art to science and create a common language around growth at Atlassian. The growth process is, first we define the metric opportunities. Then we conduct research. We go through experimentation loops. And finally, we implement our wins. So after we've done the experimentation loops, we'll keep on experimenting until we have something that we're happy with. And then we'll work with the product teams on actually implementing a solution that they're happy with. Pro tip, you can take any elements of this process into your own work and feel free to adopt it. So one of the key things within the growth process that we talk about is good enough design. So as a designer, most designers are tend to be pretty much perfectionists. You sweat over the details. We have shirts that say sweat the details. But as a growth designer, the details don't matter as much. So what is good enough design? Everything we do is a balance or a trade-off. Mike and Scott talked about this yesterday. Part of the toughest part of our jobs is making these trade-offs. Nothing's ever far to the right, far to the left. There's always something in between, and sometimes you have to make the tough calls. And that's actually really part of the fun about being a designer is making the tough calls. And as growth designers, we live progress over perfection. We don't sweat the details too hard on experiments because they're temporary, and the majority of our experiments will fail, and that's something that we have to be comfortable with. We create just good enough design to prove out the validity of our hypothesis that we are testing. So we don't go too far to the right. If our hypothesis is very narrowly defined, we only do enough design to prove out that hypothesis. As Mike mentioned yesterday, we need to ship to learn. At the end of the day, we are looking to increase MAU, but we want to take the path of least resistance to get there. How many of you think that's similar to product design? Or not similar to product design? Anyone think that's similar to product design? A couple people think that's similar to product design, okay. Once we have a win, we don't just ship the experiment, though. We iterate. We continue to iterate on the idea until we have a strong confidence that we are maximizing the opportunity. So if we've done some analysis and we say, okay, there is an opportunity to be found here by either reducing the friction or optimizing the experiment, we continue down that path until we think we've maxed it out or we've gotten close enough where there's another opportunity that provides more value. We move fast when experimenting. So once we are happy that we are maximizing the opportunity, we take the time to clean up the design by working with the product teams to get it ready for production. You can view all the things we're productionizing at go/growth production. And not everything we do is an A/B test. This is very important. I think a lot of people have the concept or the notion that within growth, everything we do is an A/B test. That's not necessarily true. We do a lot of early signal testing and other methods to validate our designs prior to shipping. This not only helps us iterate without having to use developer resources, which is important for us, because we're kind of a lean, mean team, but helps improve the odds of having a successful experiment. We've used early signal testing in a variety of ways, from measuring comprehension in the dialogues above to better understanding the deployment flow for WAC. You can view all of our signal tests at go/growth signal tests. And most importantly, and this is the thing that I want to stress upon, is that small improvements equal big results. So we know that this works relatively well. We don't have to change something drastically in order to have a big win. Just changing something, just having a micro optimization within the experience can have a huge downstream impact. For example, a single subject line change can result in an additional 50,000 MAU over the course of a year. So this is something that we just recently experimented on. We had 4 different subject line changes for our invite emails. And the thing that's really important here to notice is that a small change higher up in a funnel, and if you think about everything that we do as a funnel, there's feature funnels, and if you look at it as a funnel, a small change higher up in the funnel can have huge downstream impact. So it's a testament to how important copy and IX is when we're thinking about the experience. To quote Scott from yesterday, text is as important as everything else in the product, so we should be focusing a lot. And it's really a call out to the IXers and copywriters here, is that, and as a designer, some of the things that we do within growth is we actually start with copy, because we know how important it is, and we've tested it tons of times. You can view all of our big results at go/growth big results. OK, so as a case study, I talked a bit about the process. Now let's show how this works in real life. Now walk you through some of the work that we've been doing in the Pecha Kucha yesterday. I wanted to show you what goes into a winning experiment. So Grow 4555, the PA Fox chat, I think the majority of people actually had their hands on their bum yesterday. So our hypothesis for this experiment was we believe showing evaluators a Fox Live chat with PAs during their trial will result in a higher purchase rate, because the human presence will give evaluators more confidence. The idea for this hypothesis actually had been brought up multiple times within ideation, so we knew that this was a recurring thing that we wanted to experiment on. So this is actually what the winning version of the experiment looked like. We were able to look at the actions taken by evaluators that had a high correlation with retention and build them into the experience. We also conducted research with the product advocates into the common questions that were asked during their evaluation. We then created a design that showcased actions a user could take with the ability to reach out to a product advocate if they had more questions. The experiment, once productionized, is expected to provide 48,000 MAU over the course of a year. The lesson here is that human touch does instill more confidence around purchase, and this is something that we're able to prove out through a series of experiments. So one thing to keep in mind is if you look back at the evolution of this idea, is that there's actually tons of experiments that have this recurring theme through it. So this was a common idea that we were actually trying to test. Multiple teams worked on different implementations of this idea. It wasn't something that we just released once, proved out, and shipped. It was something that we iterated on over the course of probably 6 to 7 months. You can see how we started with a good enough design and slowly evolved it over time to something that we are actually happy with as designers. And now we're working with the product advocates and the product teams on getting this implemented. Cool. So this is actually a series of talks we'll be giving from the growth team over the next year. And if this sounds interesting, come talk to Nat, Nick, or myself. We're more than willing to actually discuss this further. I actually have time for Q&A if anyone has questions.
Yeah. Hey, morning. Thanks for that. You mentioned good enough design and not needing to or not wanting to sweat the details. What's the balance that you find in that? Because simultaneously, you also mentioned that a single subject line change creates 50K MAU. A single subject line change seems like sweating the details to me.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to realize is it really does determine. So if you think of it as another linear process, you have the idea, then you have the hypothesis, then you have the execution and iteration around it, and then the productionization. Really, the thing that we focus on in growth the most is the ideation and the idea. So if the idea is shit, it doesn't matter how good the hypothesis is or the execution of the hypothesis, it's most likely going to fail. When we talk about sweating the details, in that particular case, the hypothesis was really only focused on the subject line change. So nothing related to the email template was tested. And we really do, so if you think of it, there's micro-optimizations and there's something more holistic. And we talk about this in the Bowie scale as well. So we have these larger experiments, which is like, so micro-optimizations are trying to maximize increase the local maxima, while Bowies are trying to find new maxima. And for micro-optimizations, we try to really narrowly define the things that we change, because we want to sort of be able to control all the variables within the experiment. Whereas in the new maxima, it's something that might be more holistic and actually spans a journey or includes multiple different changes within the product. And that's something that we can sort of more sweat the details on. For things that are smaller, we usually really only pick 1 or 2 variables to test. Otherwise, it can sort of skew our analysis of the experiment.
Hey, so in that last example, you went through 7 variations before you found the one that worked. How did you know to keep trying on that idea 7 times?
So we actually, and I can actually go back. There's actually a lot of successful experiments here. So all of these first ones were actually successful as well. We had 2 that had no significant change. So it really just depends on what the metric you're trying to move is. So in the case of the winning variation, the metric that we were trying to test was MAU. In the first experiments that we were actually running, it was more feature usage. How are users engaging with the feature? How is it helping to convert evals, not purchases? And so it's like When you do experiment, the thing that you really want to focus on is what metric you're trying to move. Very similar within your, not just within growth, right? Product, everything we design should be impact driven. Like what is the thing that you're trying to actually get your user to do? What is the action you're trying to get your user to take? So not all these had the same metric that they were trying to move, but the first experiments that we actually did have were statistically significant at moving the primary metric. So that's why we continue to iterate on them. The one thing you don't want to do is the definition of sanity is repeating something over and over again that you know it's not going to work. So like don't bang your head against the wall 20 times if you haven't gotten any sort of inkling that it's going to be successful.
Work off that coffee this one. Nice one, nice one. Haha. In this case study, so you talked about how you seem to validate that the human touch is a good thing,
Yep.
improve the experience. Is that a reusable learning that we can carry forward without further experimentation into other parts of the product?
So the thing to be very clear on is that just because you proved out an experiment once doesn't mean that it's always going to be repeatable. So there's a lot of different constraints that go into the experimentation process, and those constraints and variables might not always be consistent over time. So if I was to experiment on something, and this is just a broad generalization, but if I was to experiment on something on a website and, for instance, 2 years later experiment on it again, I might not get the same results even if everything else was sort of controlled, right? Your audience changes, segmentation is really important. So not necessarily. I would say it's as a generalization, we know that this works better, but it really does come down to a lot of different criteria that goes into the experience. The one thing to be cognizant of with this is just because we know that this is successful, there are obviously the business constraints that go into it. And as a growth team, we want to be able to provide the business data. And so this goes into the previous talk that we just had, right? We want to be able to provide the business data to make better decisions. So here, there's a lot of other constraints like, oh, how many the PA availability, like how many PAs do we need to hire if we were to actually have a high touch implementation either in product or top of the funnel. This is something that we don't do today. We're very much about the low touch model. So if we wanted to do high touch, there's obviously a business cost to do that. But we know now that we can actually provide the business data saying like, if you actually invest X amount of dollars into hiring more PAs or doing this, that we will actually have a MAU return.
I actually have two questions, but I'm just going to ask them both at once. I'm sure some are familiar with Jillian Morris from Hitlist and his quote saying that if we invest in growth before investing in retention, we're essentially renting our users, not acquiring them. How do we make sure that as a company we're making the right investments and that we're looking at long-term metrics beyond MAU? How does growth play a role in that? I guess I'll just let you answer that one first.
So we have a natural retention rate already within the product. So like if you think of pirate metrics, which is the best way to look at it, we already have a natural retention rate of our products. So we know theoretically in a perfect world, the more people that you put into the top of the funnel, you'd keep at least constant the same amount of people at the bottom of the funnel. Doesn't necessarily work that way as a swath generalization, but we already have a natural retention rate. I would say that the bigger opportunity is, and this really goes into the data analyst, or the analysis of the data, the bigger opportunity is probably at the top of the funnel, not at the bottom by default. Yeah, you might be renting your users, but you're at least keeping the same proportion of users that you keep within that funnel today. And there might be a slight degradation over time, but not by much. Yeah, I think the big thing to realize though is that you shouldn't be investing in growth without product market fit. So if your product is shit and or like you haven't figured out necessarily what the core value proposition of your product is, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to invest in growth. You should invest in product. But because all of our products are relatively long-lived and have been around, like that's why now as a company we're investing more in growth.
That actually leads right into my second question, which is perfect, and it has to do with top of the funnel in marketing. So how do you, or should you, if at all, think of new customers and how you approach growth, assuming that our existing customers have a little bit of brand loyalty and affinity by already using our products? Is there a different tactic you should use for new customers when it comes to top of the funnel?
Yeah, so within growth in general, cohort analysis is probably one of the most important things to do and something that we don't necessarily do a lot of. New to new and new to existing are probably the two biggest segments that we can probably target And we've done a decent job of sort of segmenting those out when we do experiments. So we have, in products especially, we have an evaluation flow, or at least we have a subset of users that we can target for evaluators, and we have a subset of users that we can target for paid customers. And we do sort of delineate between those two when we run experiments in product. On top of the funnel, I'm not sure if we've done anything specifically to new to existing yet, but we mostly focus on new to all. So we don't necessarily do a good job of cohort analysis there, but it's probably one of the most important things to do. And specifically within product and within growth, it's a lot easier to experiment on new to new because there's no preconceived notions of how your product works, the experience, and in general, like there's sort of a blank canvas to experiment on.
I won't put the mic in your face again.
Hi. I was just curious around working to get this stuff into product. Where do you guys hand off? How does the product implement? Do you retest? What's the process?
Actually, I would rather hand that off to Nick if he's here, maybe.
Sorry.
If you want to take that one, or you want me to?
Nick, you've been volunteered, but he's not here.
Or George.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm a team lead in growth. I'm actually going to hand it to George. Only because George is currently doing this process right now, so maybe you could just outline that experiment and the process you've had to go through.
Okay, sure. I'm going to hand it off to... okay, so I'm a development team lead in growth, sorry. Yep. And we're currently implementing one of the designs that Patrick showed up there, which was a reinvite user experiment. And what we found was that by notifying admins of users that haven't logged in yet after an invite, after about 7 to 30 days, those users will come back in and log in again if we reinvite them. So that showed an increase in MAU, I think, of 15,000. So we went on to productionize it. So the next step was to bring the designer who worked on that experiment back in to look at what would be acceptable for product. And they came up with an acceptable design, which product we're really happy with. So now our team is doing the implementation of that feature in product in Jira Frontend. And we're implementing it using Dart features, which are powered by our experiment service. So we can A/B test it once it's actually in product and make sure that we saw the same improvement that we saw when we run the experiment. And that allows us to run it in product with slightly different design than it was in the experiment, where we went all guns blazing, and see if we can get a similar kind of improvement without going too big. And if we don't get it, we can start moving closer to the design that we had in the experiment.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and just to reiterate on that, like I mentioned earlier, when we have a successful experiment, we don't just ship it right away. Like, we do take the time to go back to the drawing board and see if there's any improvements that we can make on it. And most of the time there is. So but then again, we do launch it as an experiment, or we launch it as a feature flag, and then we were able to actually measure the impact once we productionize it. So if any of the changes that we made don't necessarily, we'll at least be able to measure the impact of that after the success. And this is actually a great way. I highly recommend, if you're on a product team and you're working on a new feature, please launch it behind a feature flag and then run it as an experiment. It's a better way to actually be in a controlled environment, split cohort your feature, and then actually see what the impact you have. It's really, really powerful as a designer, especially, to be able to see the impact that your design has on the users and then be able to analyze it. We want to get out of this mentality of just shipping something, moving on to the next roadmap item. If you ship it as a feature flag and you ship it in a controlled way and you actually get the data, you can analyze it and then iterate and make overall a better holistic design.
Right, I think we've got one more question. Time for one more question, if there's anybody else. Oh, he was up first, sorry. Gotta be quick.
Hey, you mentioned that you define sort of your metrics before you start to say we want MAU to increase or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. How do you make sure that you, when you run an experiment, are considering other variables that you may change as a result that you may not have intended to change?
So we usually always pick our primary success metric, but we also have secondary success metrics that we're tracking. So at the top of the funnel, this is really, really easy to actually do because every metric for every experiment that we run is automatically tracked and shown in our dashboard view. So when we ship an experiment on top of the funnel, we can see the impact on every key business metric there. So it's not something that is an unknown to us. In product, we have secondary success metrics that we analyze. We have data analysts on our team that can then go run the numbers and see what the impact is there. Then at the point where we determine success, we have to make a trade-off. Again, it all comes back down to trade-offs. It's probably one of the, it's the standard thing. It depends. It's also trade-offs, right? We have to see if the primary success metric moves by 5%, it's statistically significant, but it negatively impacts the secondary success metric. But that's only, then as a business, we have to determine if that's okay.
All right, so please put your hands together for Patrick. Thank you very much. We're out of time. Thank you.